This is a story about a fisherman, a dolphin, and a stick figure named Sketch, who happened to be sitting in the boat that day. Sketch is not a real fisherman. His arms are lines, his head is a circle, his fishing pole is a slightly longer line, with a smaller line dangling off the end. But he is very serious about his morning on the water, and he has a thermos of coffee that he guards with both stick hands, and he has been out here since before sunrise, because the quiet is the point, not the fish. He is minding his business when the water beside the boat shifts. He looks over. There is a dolphin, and the dolphin is pushing something toward the hull, something small. Something wrapped in a tangle of fishing line, something that is barely moving. Sketch blinks his two-dot eyes. He leans over the edge of the boat. He works carefully, because he is a stick figure, and his fingers are technically just one line divided into suggestions of fingers. But he manages. He gets the line off. He holds the baby dolphin in what passes for his hands. The mother is right there, circling, watching. And Sketch has been alive long enough to know that something just happened that he does not have the vocabulary for. A wild animal with every reason to be afraid of him, to avoid him, to flee, brought her most important thing directly to him and waited. He sets the calf gently back in the water and watches it swim toward its mother, and for a long time he just sits there in the boat with his thermos of coffee growing cold. And then, because Sketch is exactly the kind of stick figure who cannot let a thing go once it has gotten into his head, he asks out loud to no one in particular, "Why would she do that?" That question is going to take us a long time to answer. Let us start at the beginning. The most important fact about humans and animals is one that almost nobody says out loud. By every reasonable measure, animals should be terrified of us. Not cautious, not wary. Genuinely, completely, biologically terrified. We are the species that hunted the woolly mammoth into extinction. We are the species that has displaced, trapped, caged, and occasionally eaten basically every other large animal we have ever encountered. If you built a threat assessment model for wild animals and plugged in everything humans have done over the last 10,000 years, the output would be very simple. Avoid at all costs. Maximum distance. Do not approach under any circumstances. Sketch draws this threat assessment model on an imaginary whiteboard. It is a very clean model. It has one output. That output is a stick figure running away very fast. And yet, over and over, across species that share almost nothing biologically, in situations that have nothing to do with each other, on every continent, in every kind of ecosystem, the opposite keeps happening. Animals bring their babies to us, not randomly, not panicking, deliberately, to specific humans, at specific moments. Usually, the worst moments, when a life is at stake and there is nowhere else to turn. Sketch erases his whiteboard. He draws a question mark instead. It is a very large question mark. He stares at it. The first explanation he reaches for is the obvious one. Maybe animals just kind of like us now. Maybe it is the food. Humans leave a lot of food around, and animals know it. And maybe that general warm feeling about food has softened the whole relationship into something a little less sharp. That is the comfortable answer. It is also incomplete. And Sketch knows it because the animals that bring babies to humans are not doing it at the food bowl. They are doing it at the worst possible moment, the moment of maximum vulnerability, which is exactly when an animal's instinct to protect and conceal should be at its absolute highest. A mother's behavior in a crisis is the truest possible signal of what she actually trusts. So, let us talk about trust, what it actually is, how it actually builds. Because the story of why a dolphin would push an injured calf toward a human is, at its core, a story about trust. And trust does not arrive all at once. Sketch sits down on the floor of the boat. He puts his thermos down. He thinks about the cat. He has a cat. Her name is not relevant to this story, but she is orange and disapproves of most things. When Sketch first brought her home, she hid under the couch for 11 days. He left food near the couch. He spoke in a low voice. He did not try to pull her out. He sat near the couch and read books, and existed in a way that was consistently calm and consistently non-threatening and consistently boring. On the 12th day, she came out. On the 14th day, she sat next to him. On day 30, she brought him a toy mouse at 3 in the morning with such visible pride that he felt genuinely honored. He had passed a test, is the thing. He just had not known it was a test. Cats are extraordinarily good at what researchers sometimes call constructing a mental map of safe versus unsafe entities. They watch, they remember, they categorize. They do not do this in a fuzzy general way. They do it with remarkable specificity. They know this particular human is loud and unpredictable. They know that particular human is slow and reliable and produces food. They know the neighbor who moved the cat off the porch that one time last August, and they will not forget it. Once a cat builds enough positive data on a specific human, something shifts in the internal classification. That human stops being filed under potential threat. They get moved to a different category, something close to trusted extended family member. And trusted extended family members get access to things that strangers do not. They get access to the kittens. There are well-documented cases of stray cats and feral colony cats bringing newborn kittens to specific humans. Not random humans, specific ones. The person who leaves food out. The person who once removed a thorn from a paw and was apparently never forgiven for it, because now there is a steady rotation of kittens appearing on the porch like some kind of subscription service nobody signed up for. Sketch thinks about this for a while. He thinks about the 11 days under the couch. He thinks about the fact that his cat did not make her assessment quickly or casually. She gathered data. She updated her model. And when she finally decided the data was sufficient, she changed her behavior in a very specific way. The kittens showed up. He reaches for his thermos and finds it cold. He gets up to rewarm it on the small camp stove at the back of the boat, and while he is doing that, he looks out at the water where the dolphin and her calf disappeared, and he thinks, how many observations did she make first? Here's what we know about dolphins and whales and the specific kind of trust they build. Dolphins and whales operate in pods that function on cooperative care. Not just mothers and calves, the whole group. Adults taking turns watching young ones. Group members responding to distress signals from other group members. Coordinated rescue behavior within the pod when someone gets into trouble. It is a sophisticated social structure built on exactly the kind of logic that says, I cannot fix everything alone, but together we can manage more. That logic does not automatically stop at the species line. There are numerous documented cases of marine mammals approaching boats specifically when a calf is injured or entangled, not haphazardly, not in panic, with something researchers describe as directed and deliberate, positioning the calf alongside the hull, holding position and waiting. Marine biologists who have observed this behavior describe a quality to it that is difficult to articulate without reaching for words like intentional or purposeful, which are words scientists are generally reluctant to apply to animal behavior and yet keep using anyway because nothing else quite fits. The cognitive wiring that makes this possible is the same wiring that makes intrapod cooperative care work. If you already have the capacity to recognize this individual needs help and that individual over there has tools I do not have, it is apparently not an enormous leap to occasionally extend that framework across species lines. Especially toward a species that has been floating around in slow, loud, clearly non-predatory boats for generations. Sketch thinks about this word, generations. He thinks about how much information a dolphin pod accumulates over time. Grandmother dolphins who have seen hundreds of boats. Mother dolphins who grew up watching their pod interact with those boats. Calves who absorb the behavioral templates of the adults around them before they ever personally encounter a human. A young dolphin does not arrive at its first encounter with a boat completely blank. It arrives carrying inherited behavioral predispositions shaped by every encounter its family line has had before it. Some of those predispositions lean toward fear. In populations that have experienced a lot of harm from humans, the fear is deep and persistent and rational. But in populations that have experienced mostly neutral or occasionally positive contact, something softer develops. Not trust exactly, more like the absence of maximum alarm, a lower default baseline, a slightly longer pause before retreat. That pause is everything, because in a crisis, a slightly longer pause is the difference between turning toward and turning away. There is also a detail here that almost never gets discussed, and Sketch thinks it matters a lot. He thinks about what he looked like to the dolphin mother. He was sitting still in a boat that was not chasing her. He was not loud. When she approached, he became quieter. When he saw the calf was in trouble, He moved slowly and deliberately, and produced exactly the kind of gentle, careful behavior that an animal with experience observing humans in distress situations might have learned to expect from the useful ones. Humans produce a very specific body language response to animal distress: slower movements, quieter voices, careful hands. We do it almost automatically, the way you slow down and lower your voice near something hurt and small. Animals with strong capacity for reading body language, which is most of the ones we are talking about, are picking up on this signal. And a species that consistently responds to vulnerability with gentleness, rather than aggression, eventually gets filed in a different category. We are loud. We are everywhere. We smell like soap and sunscreen and bad decisions. But we are also, weirdly, one of the only species on the planet that regularly intervenes to help infant animals that are not our own. That reputation travels. Sketch puts his thermos down again and thinks about crows. He thinks about crows because if you have ever spent time understanding crows, you know that they are the animal most likely to have strong opinions about you, specifically as an individual human, and to have those opinions for a very, very long time. Crows have facial recognition. They can identify individual human faces and remember the associated behavioral history with a specificity that is genuinely humbling for the humans involved. Researchers have documented crows holding grudges against specific people for years, passing information about dangerous humans to their offspring, who then treat that specific human with hostility before ever having personally interacted with them. The crow community has a distributed information network, and you are in it whether you know it or not. The inverse is also true. Crows who have positive interaction histories with specific humans extend something that functions like loyalty. They return. They watch out. They bring things. In some cases, they bring shiny objects as what appears to be a gift, which researchers are careful to describe in very neutral language, but which the humans receiving crow gifts tend to describe as meaningful in a way that is hard to explain. And when a crow raises young, the assessment of which humans are safe near those young does not start from scratch. It starts from the accumulated record. Sketch thinks about what it would mean to have your safety record checked by a crow. To know that somewhere in a crow's memory you are filed under reliable, and that this filing will influence the behavior of the crow's children toward you before any of them have ever personally met you. He finds this both flattering and slightly alarming. Which brings us to dogs. And here the story shifts from individual trust to something baked into biology at a much deeper level. Dogs are the long game. Dogs are what happens when 15,000 years of coevolution rewires a species around a different animal's social structure. Domesticated dogs have spent so long, alongside humans, under such specific selection pressure toward human-compatible behavior that humans are not really an external entity to them in the way we are to a dolphin or a crow. Humans are part of the pack, specifically the humans they live with. Pack members get access to things strangers do not. A mother dog who trusts her owner will often bring newborn puppies directly to that person, not just nearby, to them. She picks each puppy up and carries it over and puts it down at the human's feet. She does this deliberately, one puppy at a time, with visible intentionality. She is not confused about what she is doing. She is not acting on a misfired instinct. She is doing exactly what a dog does when she has decided a specific individual is trusted enough to be included in the protective circle around her most vulnerable offspring. Sketch watches this happen in his memory, because he has a friend who breeds dogs and he has sat in a room watching a mother dog make this delivery, and it is one of the most emotionally affecting things he has ever experienced. And he is a stick figure, so he does not have the most expressive face, but his two-dot eyes were wide. The reason this matters beyond dogs is that the domestication process did not create a completely new instinct from nothing. It amplified and redirected tendencies that already existed in the ancestral wolf population. The baseline wiring for trust-based inclusion of non-kin adults in infant care, alloparenting in the technical language, was already there. Domestication pointed it at humans and turned up the dial. Which raises an interesting question about what happens in the space between fully wild and fully domesticated. In areas with long histories of low-conflict human coexistence, feeding stations, low hunting pressure, and generations of neutral encounters, wild wolf populations show measurably lower baseline fear responses around humans. Coyote populations in areas with long histories of benign human contact show different behavioral profiles than populations in areas with high conflict. It is not domestication exactly, it is something adjacent to it. A soft accumulation of experience that gradually shifts the default setting. The dial does not go all the way to dog, but it moves. Sketch stares at the water for a long time. He is trying to build a mental model of what this looks like from the animal side. An individual wild animal is not carrying a species-level assessment of humans. It is carrying a personal record shaped by its own experience and the socially transmitted experience of the group it was raised in. That record is specific, granular, and updatable. This matters because it means the behavior we are talking about, the baby delivering behavior, is not animals trusting humanity in some broad cosmic sense. It is animals trusting specific humans based on specific accumulated evidence. The dolphin was not approaching the nearest human. She was approaching this particular slow, quiet figure in this particular non-threatening boat that had been sitting in this general area for some time. That distinction does not make the story less remarkable. It makes it more remarkable because it means the trust is real. It was earned. It is based on something. Let us talk about elephants. Sketch thinks about elephants with particular care, because elephant behavior around humans might be the single most emotionally complex example in this entire conversation. Elephants have long memories. This is not a cliché. It is a well-documented biological fact. Elephants remember individual humans for years, sometimes for the entire lifetime of the animal. They remember specific interactions, positive and negative, with a fidelity that puts most human memory to shame. They form deep, multi-generational, social bonds. The social intelligence required to manage and maintain those bonds across a herd that includes animals of many different ages, relationship types, and histories is substantial. Elephants recognize when a herd member is distressed. They comfort, they assist, they mourn. The social and emotional complexity of elephant life is not a simplified approximation of human emotional life. It is its own, fully realized version of what it looks like to be a deeply social creature that holds the past close and acts on it. In multiple well-documented sanctuary situations, elephant mothers have been observed presenting an injured or ill calf to human caretakers, standing back, waiting, sometimes for hours, watching what happens with an attention that researchers describe as focused and deliberate. There are accounts of elephants recognizing specific human caretakers after years of separation and responding with behavior that looks in the most careful, neutral language available, like emotional recognition. If an elephant has held a positive association with a specific human for a decade, and that specific human has demonstrated the capacity to help with exactly the kind of problem that is currently threatening the calf, then bringing the calf toward that human is not irrational. It is not mysterious. It is the most logical, available option as evaluated by a creature with very good information and very good memory. Sketch draws a timeline on his imaginary whiteboard. He marks the first positive interaction. He marks the second. He marks the years in between, filled with smaller, neutral, or positive moments. He draws an arrow from all of this to the moment of crisis. He labels the arrow trust, but then crosses it out and writes accumulated evidence instead, because that is more accurate and he is trying to be precise. Now, here is a piece of this that almost never makes it into the conversation. Humans are unusually sensitive to distress signals from other species. There is actual research suggesting that the acoustic structure of distress calls across many mammal species, the specific pitch and urgency and rhythm, shares enough structural similarity that human adults respond to them instinctively, even when they have never heard that particular animal call before. A crying human infant and a distressed puppy trigger similar physiological responses in adult humans: faster heart rate, immediate attention, an urge to investigate. This may not be a coincidence. It may be a somewhat leaky caretaking instinct, originally calibrated for human infant distress, that fires at broadly similar signals regardless of species. We did not evolve this response for dolphins or elephant calves, but it applies to them anyway, and the result is that humans consistently produce the right behavioral response when a young animal is in distress. The right behavioral response is, stop what you are doing and help. Animals notice patterns. If a particular type of creature in a particular type of context consistently responds to the distress of vulnerable young with gentleness and assistance rather than aggression or indifference. That pattern gets incorporated into how that creature is classified. Not consciously, not deliberately, but in the way that all useful information gets incorporated, as a learned expectation that shapes future behavior. We have, apparently, despite our complicated track record with the natural world, accumulated a reputation. Sketch sits with this for a while. He thinks about what reputation means across species. He does not think it is a human concept. He thinks it is a pattern recognition concept. Enough repeated, consistent information about how a particular entity behaves in particular circumstances eventually generates a reliable expectation about how that entity will behave in future similar circumstances. That is all reputation is. And it is applicable to any creature with sufficient memory and social information sharing capacity, which is a lot of creatures. He thinks about the less comfortable version of this story because he is honest and he does not want to over-romanticize what is happening. Sometimes, bringing a baby to a human is not a deliberate, trust-based decision. Sometimes it is desperation. A mother animal facing a predator, a flooding nest, an injury she cannot treat, scans the available options and selects the least threatening, large, slow-moving object in the vicinity, which is frequently, awkwardly, a human. We are big. We move slowly compared to most predators. We smell like cooked food and synthetic fabrics rather than blood and adrenaline. In a moment of crisis, when an animal's options have narrowed to almost nothing, the human option can win, not because we are trusted, but because we are the least alarming thing available. But here is the thing about even the desperation version. Even in that scenario, the animal's threat assessment still has to produce a result that favors the human option. That result requires accumulated information. It requires enough prior experience or inherited behavioral information to make the human option thinkable in a moment of extremity. We have to be somewhere on the safe enough list to even be considered. And the fact that we consistently appear on that list across wildly different species in wildly different contexts says something real about the accumulated record we have built. Accidentally, incrementally, inconsistently, we ended up being the species that sometimes helps. And sometimes helps turns out to be worth more than you would think. Now here is the last piece. The piece that Sketch finds both the most important and the most difficult to sit with. This trust is not guaranteed. It is not universal. It is not owed. Animal populations with high conflict histories with humans do not show this behavior. Heavily hunted populations. Populations with extensive negative encounter histories. Animals living in areas with persistent habitat destruction or human predation show essentially the opposite of what we have been discussing. Maximum avoidance, maximum distance. The threat assessment model produces exactly the output you would expect. Run. The baby delivering behavior shows up almost exclusively in populations with low conflict histories, individual positive track records, or species with strong enough cognitive and social systems to make case-by-case individual assessments rather than blanket species-level judgments, which means the behavior is not a comment on humans in general. It is a comment on specific humans in specific places with specific histories, which means it can be lost very quickly, with very little effort on our part. Sketch draws this on his whiteboard. He draws the slow, accumulative trust built over years. He draws a single, careless action. He draws what happens to the trust. The trust does not survive the careless action. It takes years to build and much less than a year to destroy. This is true in human relationships, and it appears to be true in cross-species relationships as well. The asymmetry is brutal, and it is important. There is a conservationist in Kenya who has spent 22 years working with a specific elephant population. Over those 22 years, calves she helped when they were young have grown up and brought their own calves to be near her, not to any other human, to her specifically. She has a relationship with individual animals that spans generations of that herd, and she describes it, carefully, as the single most meaningful professional experience of her life. That relationship took 22 years to build. It is built on every morning she showed up and every choice she made in every encounter and every gentle interaction and every moment she prioritized the elephant's comfort over her own convenience. 22 years of data that added up to a particular assessment. There is no shortcut for that. Sketch thinks about the dolphin again. He thinks about all the mornings some quiet fisherman sat in a boat near that same stretch of water and did not chase, and did not harm, and did not disturb. He thinks about all the encounters that preceded the one encounter that ended with an injured calf being pushed toward a human for help. He thinks about the fact that he is not special. He is the result of a lot of other people who came before him, who made enough good choices that the dolphin's threat assessment, when it mattered most, came out on the right side. He picks up his cold thermos. He pours it over the side and watches the steam rise. He does not know how to feel about being the beneficiary of accumulated trust he did not personally build. He is grateful. He is also aware that it is now his job not to waste it. Every encounter he has from here forward adds to a file that is connected to files other people built. He is not starting from zero. He is inheriting a ledger, and it is his responsibility to keep contributing to the right column. We talk about animal trust as if it is something animals do to us, as if it arrives from outside as a gift or a curiosity or a viral video to share. But it is not a gift from them. It is a return on an investment made by every human who, in some quiet moment, in some field or forest or stretch of water, chose patience over aggression and gentleness over fear and presence over disturbance. That investment compounds. Slowly, unevenly, over timescales that do not fit neatly into a single human lifetime. But it compounds. And every once in a while, at the worst possible moment, when a desperate parent has nowhere else to turn and a life is genuinely on the line, that compounded return shows up in the form of a wild animal, looking directly at a specific human, and making a calculation that takes everything into account, everything remembered and inherited and learned, and arriving at an answer, worth the risk. Sketch draws this on his whiteboard. He draws a small stick figure in a boat. He draws a circle in the water. He draws an arrow from the circle to the boat. He draws a smaller circle inside the first one and labels it the most important thing. He stands back and looks at what he has drawn. He is a stick figure, so he cannot cry, but his two dot eyes stay on the image for a long time. He picks up his gear. He starts the engine. He heads back toward shore, slowly, quietly, the way you move when you are trying not to disturb anything, the way you learn to move when you finally understand that the world is watching you and keeping score, and that your whole life is a data point in a ledger that matters far beyond the edges of your own small story. He has a lot more boat trips to take, a lot more mornings on the water, a lot more choices about how to be the kind of thing a dolphin might consider worth approaching. He is looking forward to it.